almost 5 years to go through, so. Go. Hi, welcome to Ink, Insight, and Imperfection. My 25 years of self-publishing. Yes, general overview. This year marks the 25th year of self-publishing for me. So we're going to dive into the peaks and valleys of self-publishing comics and all the early experiments, successes, failures, and all the things that taught me the most and gave me some ideas of productivity habits and how my creative process has evolved over the years. So we'll start with the basics. Who am I? I'm Brian Canini. But first and foremost, I am a husband. That's my lovely wife, Amy, there. I am also a dad of 3 children, 18, 10, and 5 to be exact. And yeah. Beyond that, I'm also one of the editors and founders of the Columbus Scribbler, the free comics newspaper in Central Ohio. And I am a cartoonist. And to not leave you with the mistaken impression that this is all that I do, I also have a day job, work 40 hours a week as a web developer. There we go. So, we'll start at the very, very beginning, pre-self-publishing. I've been making comics since I was about 6 years old when I discovered these guys, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And this, I believe, if memory serves me correct, is the first comic book I ever got, the Turtle Adventures by Archie Comics. The Turtles changed my path in life in innumerable ways, most important being, of course, it gave me a creative outlet. Here's some early drawings. Dick Tracy was a big deal and big influence for me, so some cops and a bad guy. I loved Dick Tracy's villains, so obviously the bad guy has to be deformed in some way. Here's an early comic by me, The Adventures of Bugman. I made over 100 issues. These are all 8.5 by 11 comics that I folded in the middle and stapled and just had a time of it. And I drew hundreds of comics, some of which were original characters, some of which are generic knockoffs of things that I was into. You'll take note of Z-Men and mutants. So it was quite the journey, which takes us to the beginnings. I guess important things to note about this photo. First of all, that's me on the far left. In the middle is my wife in the future. We met in high school. And next to her is my best friend in high school, Derek Baxter, who ended up being my writing partner at the beginning of our little escapade. Now, I started self-publishing when I was my senior year of high school. So I was 18. I wandered into my local comic book store, the Laughing Ogre, and Gib, the owner there, directed me to some flyers on the free table for the comic book convention. Comic book convention? You guessed it, space. This was 2001. So I signed up. I sent a check to some random guy I'd never met or heard of named Bob Corby, and lo and behold, he said he had a table for me. So I figured, well, I should probably make some comics. So I made 3 comics because I was overzealous and the enthusiasm of youth. These are the first 3 comics that I ever self-published. For whatever reason, I did 3 because it felt like a magic number to me. Derek, the person that I pointed out in the last photo, his mom had a copy machine at her work, and we rated that. And Derek helped me write a couple of these stories he wrote. We collaborated on the My Neighbor Satan and the second issue, The Wanderer. But we raided her copy machine and we cut all of the comics to standard comic size because that was a brilliant move on our part. I guess benefits of having multiple things at your table. That was an early lesson, is that you have more things to sell to people. So if someone's not really feeling a story about Satan in the suburbs, well, you can offer them the other things that you have. And which I guess led to one of my first great comic moments at the first space. Lo and behold, one of my inspirations was wandering around the convention. His name was Jeff Smith, local hero and creator of Bone. And he wandered up to my table, and I was able to sell him one of my books, which was incredible. And I was flabbergasted and stunned and walking on cloud 9 for the next couple of days, to say the least. Shortly after Space, which, you know, I deemed as a huge success, I made a comic. I sold to one of my heroes. It's wins all over. I could have sold nothing else and been fine. But during Space, there was actually a guy, his picture's inaccurate, wandering around with Jeff Smith from the Ogre, one of the original owners, I believe, not Gib, but and mentioned bring some comics by the shop, and they would sell them. So I did, and I wandered in there, and Gib, who I've known since early childhood, like I said, my local comic shop, was gracious as always, and was excited to learn that I made comics, and he bought my comics. Early lesson, I found out that when you're selling to a shop, they expect to get like at least half off the cover price, not pay full price, because they have to sell it and they have to make something called a profit. So he was gracious with me, and then next Wednesday when I came to get my things, I found my comics sitting on the new comic rack next to X-Men, which was an incredible feeling as an 18-year-old. And it led me to getting more involved in the comics community. So I had comics now, so I started sending them off to places. These are some early review zines. Ian Sears, who's downstairs, actually did Obscurity Limited, and the late Leonard Justin did Out of the Blue. O Comics, Bob Corby is still doing that. His thing was everyone who tables at Space can be a part of it at that time. So I took him up on that, and that was actually the first book that I ever saw my work printed by someone else, and it was in very fancy, it was actually printed, a very fancy book with a glossy cover. And then next to that is the rap sheet. At Space, I learned about the local comics club, the Small Press Syndicate, at the time, and I paid my dues and became a member, and sure enough, that year they had an all comics issue, so I submitted some comics to that, and even was ecstatic to find out that a couple of my panels they put on the back cover, which was awesome. Again, early funness. Now, a bit about me. I was a summer camp counselor through my youth, and one of the skits, which was a short play that we did to entertain children, was called, I decided to take my love of comics to, and I created a character called Plunger Boy, and it became The Adventures of Plunger Boy, and it was something that we did, honestly, we did this before meals to give the kitchen staff extra time to prep and keep the kids entertained so they wouldn't revolt. And so it was a fun skit. We grabbed random utensils from the dining hall and used them as props, carrying a plunger, and then we picked random people from the audience and gave them a random prop and a hat with their character name on it, and they had to follow us along. Why am I bringing this up? Well, because I had done this for a couple of years, and I just started self-publishing, so my next project obviously was going to be The Adventures of Plunger Boy, the comic. My senior year of high school, I actually worked it out so that I had no real classes, except for like 2, and they were both in the morning. So my whole afternoon was just study halls. And around the spring, now that I was a self-publisher, I convinced my friend and boss at the summer camp, Anna, to say that I was going to camp to work. And instead, I made a deal with her and said I was going to make these comics for their trading post, which is where the kids bought stuff. And I would split the profits with the staff. She agreed to it, so she signed the paperwork, and I got to leave school and draw comics. And this is what I came up with. Always great when that stuff works out, right? So let's see here. The great thing about Plunger Boy was that it was a huge success. At this point, sorry, getting all forward. I was drawing these at 11 by 17 folded in half, so the end result was a zine that wasn't quite a digest, so I had to trim off the bottom. I have issues downstairs if anyone's curious to see what they actually look like. But
they're great.
The grand thing of this was that I had a captive audience with the kids. I'd do the skit, they'd go to the trading post, see the comics, and boom, instant sale. So now we're going to move on to the college years. This is me, and that long-haired gentleman is me as well. I went to art school. I think you might be in one of these photos, Mike.
Yeah,
this guy with the choker collar was my roommate in college, and I ended up making comics with him too. More on that later. But so I went to art school, and the thing about art school, you do a lot of kind of running through your influences. I spent all my time pretty much drawing comics and figuring out who I was as an artist. Plunger Boy is very much heavily influenced by the Tick, but I mean, I've already mentioned the Ninja Turtles. These are some of the other things. I also discovered influences while I was there. College years, the first time I read Watchmen, the first time I read Dark Knight Returns. Huge fan of Savage Dragon by Eric Larson. And over there is Daffy Duck. That's from a cartoon called The Great Piggy Bank Robbery, where Daffy plays Dick Tracy. And it was a huge influence on my childhood. That particular scene is where a character named, I think, Eraserhead basically erases Daffy, and that blew my mind as a little kid. And then, of course, I'm a kid of the 80s and 90s, so I grew up with The Simpsons. They have a huge influence on my humor in general. But I was learning while doing, and in that note, I collaborated with other creators, other students in college. Also, this was the dawn of the internet. We're talking 2001, 2002, so I jumped on a chat room and found writers and actually drew a bunch of stories for various writers. Life with Dad, that guy with the mask, is another story by a random writer. This is a collaboration with my roommate and a writer I found on the chat room. The End is a apocalypse story that I did with my roommate, you know, the guy with the choke collar. He was in his goth phase at that point. We won't judge him too harshly. But let's see here. And also, this was the time that I convinced another art school friend of mine to do a 24-hour comic with me. Now, for those of you who don't know, a 24-hour comic is a challenge that was created by a cartoonist named Scott McCloud. He's famous for creating the book Understanding Comics, which is the first book that kind of took comics seriously and discussed the inner workings of the medium. But one of his challenges was a 24-hour comic in which you draw 24 pages in 24 hours. I was young ready to prove myself, ready to do the rites of passage, I convinced my buddy Alex Cabagon to do it. We woke up early, got breakfast, and one of our stipulations to keep us pure, because got to do that, was there's no prior prep to this. So we made the pact that we wouldn't plan things out, and to keep us pure, we would choose a random noun from the dictionary that the person had to make the comic about. So my random noun that Alex chose for me was a fry, which is a young fish, and I chose for him poulet, which is a young hen, which isn't even featured on the cover. But we raced through it. I can't say that it's pretty, but it got done. We both managed to finish our stories. We did it in my apartment, and as the night wore on, we got more loopy things. Backgrounds fell to the wayside. It was just random characters or silhouettes, and that was that. And I printed it up again on Derek's mom's copier at her work, secretly, over the weekend when no one was around, and premiered it at Space in 2002. One of my great early insights was that the internet was going to become a thing. So this is actually my website, sort of, as of 2003, according to the Wayback Machine. I was one of the few cartoonists to have a website at this point in time that wasn't, making random webcomics. But yeah, I sold things through the internet. And to give you an idea of what life was like, this is like pre-PayPal or anything, so they had to send you a check. But let's see here. Sorry, trying to keep organized with this ever long talk. Oh yeah, and then Plunger Boy. I got it into my head that I think I started doing the skit in 1999. So 2003 was like the 5-year anniversary of the skit. So I'm gonna make it to issue 10 by the summer of 2003. I know, you're chuckling because it's a ridiculous thing to do while you're in school. But I set my mind to it. Here are the comics that I produced in the months, and then issue 10, of course, had to be 48-page spectacular because it was an anniversary. And so I did that too, and I enlisted the help of my roommate, and we somehow managed to, crank through it. I was working part-time at a Steak and Shake during the night shift, so I didn't sleep much my college years, but we got it done. And here's the glorious thing about it. Captive audience again. This was one of my early successes. I think we printed an initial print run of like 50 comics, which ridiculous amount for, to sell, and we sold out of them in like 20 minutes at the camp. So that's the captive audience mentality. Which takes us to post-college. Post-college, I decided I wanted to see the U.S. So at 21, I hopped into a car and drove around the country and checked out our nation. And I had a friend that lived in San Diego that I met in college, and she found a place for me to stay. So I started living in San Diego and spent the better part of a decade there. Why move to San Diego if you want to make comics? Well, I can tell you right off the bat, not one of my best moves, because San Diego and California in general, very expensive. And if you want to publish things, you need money, and all your money's going to bills. So most of my San Diego years were not spent at the beach. They were spent hunched over a drawing board and at a retail job, because I needed to pay rent and printing costs. So probably not the wisest move, but young me was like, well, San Diego's where Comic-Con is. That's where comics come from. Let's go there. And so I did. And here are some early books that I utilized to help me become a serious self-publisher. Again, we're talking 2004, so very early internet. MySpace wasn't even a thing. For those of you who don't know what MySpace was, this is a thing before Facebook. It's very big. I still had a landline phone at this point, and I mention that because one of my goals at this point was to actually go to a real printer and print comics, like real comics, because I was in San Diego. I couldn't use Derek's mom's copier anymore. That was done. So I had to call printers and figure out how to do this. This was pre-print on demand, so I had to call real printers and think about real print runs of, you know, you can't do a small 100-issue print run with a real printer because it becomes exorbitantly expensive because they don't want to deal with like 100 copies. They want at least 1,000. One of my early things was, well, what's Dave Sim, the creator of Cerebus, doing? Because he's been doing this since the 80s. He's clearly got self-publishing figured out. Well, he was using a printer called Preeny Print, and unfortunately, this was 2004, 2005, Cerebus had just ended, and you know whose Preeny Print's biggest client was? It was printing Cerebus. So Preeny Print went out of business, so I could not use them. But Ian Shears, again, downstairs, great guy, he had a chat room, and he was starting kind of a distro club where, you know, we pool all our resources and we can get a cheaper costs for printers because he's promising these printers more people. So I went through him. I ended up going through Morgan Printing, who's a great printer. I believe they're in Minnesota. They're responsible for printing the original Ninja Turtles series, which, you know, to me as a fan, like, I love that connection, done. And so, so here's where early 20s me, when I was like, I did this comic called Ruffians, and this was my baby. It was the first time that I scripted a comic, like an actual script. Before that, when I was doing Plunger Boy and stuff, I'd have a piece of paper, I'd go, what's going on in this paper? And I'd just kind of figure it out as I went. With this, I wrote a script beforehand. I used 11 by 17 Bristol paper because that's what the real people used according to books. So I was going to be a real cartoonist, so that's what I was going to use. 11 by 17, very big, very hard to fill that space, especially when you're used to an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. But I did it, and quantities. Well, I read online at the Ninja Turtle website that their initial print run was 3,000 copies. I was like, beautiful, 3,000 copies at that price point. Each issue cost me 60 cents. I sell it for $3, done. I am set for rent. I'm set for the next print run. I am golden. So I ordered 3,000 copies. 3,000 copies is a lot of copies, especially when you have no form of distribution. You're in San Diego, so you have to fly everywhere to go to conventions because I can't afford a booth at San Diego Comic-Con. This was even before Hollywood got involved. So, a lot of selling challenges, and long story short, those boxes are insulating my attic still to this day. But I did it. I was gung-ho. That's early mistake, but learned eventually from it. Here's some boxes of unsold comics in my attic. And let's see here. Oh, that space, shortly after I released Ruffians, I flew home to space to have the grand premiere, and Dave Sim used to come to space. That's me in a drunken cat costume, shaking hands with Dave Sim, because at this point in time I was very shy cartoonist and was too nervous about meeting my heroes. And so I had a buddy of mine wearing the costume for the convention to make a spectacle and get sales. It was weird. It's interesting having someone dressed in cosplay at a small press convention, but it was done. And needless to say, I have this lovely photo of Dave Sim and myself shaking hands, plotting world domination.
Those are your eyes.
Yeah, those are my eyes, you can tell. Like I said, this is the early days of the internet. This would be 2006, and a little thing that you may have heard of at this point just came out. It's called YouTube. So my roommate at the time and I decided, hey, we should make a YouTube video about the My Neighbor Satan comic. Yeah. So that's my roommate, painted as Satan. Here are some things I learned about filming. Don't really like it. It's not the same thing as comics. Great thing about comics, you can sit down, you can do it. It's all on you. Film, there's a whole bunch of other people behind the camera that need to be there to actually make it work. And there's a whole other set of egos, and there's a whole other thing. So what I proposed to my roommate as a simple, let's just dress you up as Satan, you can just rant about things. Well, he was a writer, so he started scripting, and it became epic stories. And then we had to have locations, and then it became this big money pit that never ended and never really produced very many episodes. So I learned my lesson. I appreciate comics a lot more because of it, because I can, do it all. During this time, I was also still producing Ruffians, still making print runs. You'll notice that only the first issue has a color cover, and the rest of them are all just straight up newsprint. Well, that's because I had to save money if I wanted to actually do something called eating. So I needed to make cuts where cuts were concerned. First issue was 32 pages, the other issues were 12. And they have no color cover, which was brilliant on my part because it lowered the cost for me. And I was making 1,000 copies of each of these because, again, pre-print on demand, had to. But the problem with not having a color cover is it doesn't make it very desirable to a random person who's walking around the con and looking at your table. So then issue 7 came along. In issue 7, I had run out of money completely. I could no longer keep this up, ordering 1,000 copies, making rent, eating. I ate a lot of spaghetti and ramen in those years. Still can't eat ramen to this day because of it. But issue 7, I was out of money, so I had this brilliant idea. I'm like, you know what? Got 7 issues. I can present this to a publisher, and they can take on the printing costs. They can actually distribute it. Brilliant. Only problem was that at this point, I had drawn the characters for 7 issues, and I was a lot better at my craft. Because the more you draw, the better you get. So I looked back at issue 1 and realized, ugh, that is an embarrassing issue. I don't want to present this to a publisher. I know what I'll do. I will remake issue 1. No sweat. It'll be great. I will have pristine characters because I've drawn it for 7 issues. This is brilliant. Why didn't I think of it before? Which leads us to the slump years. So here's the thing about trying to remake something. This would be around 2008 when I decided to do this. Trying to remake something is a lot harder because you start second guessing yourself. You start overthinking everything. So what was originally very cut and dry, off the cuff, loosey-goosey, you start excruciatingly trying to make every line perfect. And I went to art school for graphic design, so in art school of graphic design, they drill into your head a saying, neat, clean, and perfect. because that's what you need for graphic design. Not necessarily true for comics, but it echoed through my brain and worked on it for 4 years. 4 years worked on recreating issue 1. At the end of 4 years, I had 28 pages. So, to do the math, Ruffians, I did finish it, is around 250 pages. So if I were to maintain that level of perfection and drawn it all, I would only be halfway through Ruffians right now. So something needed to change, but we'll get to that in a second, because I don't want you thinking that I was just working on Ruffians. I've always been liking to keep very busy. I was also, one of my great loves is the movie Roger Rabbit, and one of my dreams was to have a comic like Roger Rabbit where there's real people photographed talking to characters. I actually did it for an issue of Ruffians, issue 6. I tried it out, and as with things, I went with this idea to my roommate Dave, and we hashed out a grand graphic novel. So, which never came to be, because very much like film, if you're photographing people, it's the same deal. You have a lot of other people to rely on, and then by the time I got all the photographs that I needed to make this epic 300-page graphic novel, then I was faced with picking out all the photos, adjusting them, and then drawing the characters on top of them, and that was, I was already in a slump. That about killed it. But happy story, because of this project, and this is where I truly believe everything happens for a reason. Because of this project, along the way, I reconnected with my buddy Derek from high school. We had both gone our separate ways to college, and life happened. I reconnected with him because I wanted to do some writing with him again. More on that later. But during the process of shooting this epic Roger Rabbit comic, I went to Columbus and I asked Eric if he knew anybody to show up for this shoot. And I was going to shoot an AA scene because that character, the drunken cat, was going to AA in one of the scenes in this book. And he's like, yeah, sure, I'll reach out to people. And one of the people he reached out to was Amy, my now wife. And that is how we reconnected after high school. Because of that project, I now have a wife and the 3 lovely children you saw earlier. Yeah, right there. Hi, honey. Thank you. So, as I said, everything kind of happens for a reason, and this was an excruciating time in my life where I was working on a million things and nothing ever seemed to get done. Which brings us to the never-ending comic. So, 2011 was the 10-year anniversary of Derek and my premiere at Space. And I'm like, hey, I want to make a 10-year anniversary comic. That's how I reconnected with Derek, as previously mentioned. And we got to writing and had tremendous fun. We wrote some Satan comics for it, and I had grand ideas. It was 48 pages because an anniversary, why not? Always overzealous in the page count. The problem was this was still during my slump phase, and everything was slow and tedious and excruciating. And so the 10-year anniversary quickly became the 11-year anniversary issue because I was still second-guessing myself. The good news is that at this point, print on demand had become affordable and actually looked good, so I wasn't going to a real printer. This was the first comic, once I got it done, a year and a half later, to start to get me out of the slump phase of my career. Now, when we premiered this comic, it was 2012, 11 years. A buddy of mine who I had met at a previous Space, his name was Chris Monday, and he just came out with this book, 2012, Drink More Water, which is a collection of journal comics. Now, if you aren't familiar with journal comics, or diary comics, they're essentially what they sound like. It's a diary of your daily life. Every day you draw a strip or a page, Strips can vary from things that happen during the day, random thoughts, or if you're really tired, just craziness. But it's kind of the principle of doing continuously. This book changed my outlook and trajectory in comics. I got it from him and I read it on the flight home because I was still in San Diego, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to give it a try. And so I set this next year, I'm starting from space to next space. I'm going to make diary comics. So here's the thing about diary comics. They're completely free because there's something about knowing that you have tomorrow to make another comic that frees you up with today. So if you make a crap comic today, tomorrow can be much better. You always have that option. And it also kind of gives you a greater self-awareness of your life, because there's only so many times you can make a comic that's, I'm bored of making comics, I don't have anything going on today, before it becomes boring to yourself. So you actually I started actively seeking out things to do throughout life. I also became a little more self-aware of myself and started kind of digging deep inside myself and thinking about what makes me tick. Also, along the way, I experimented. This is the first time I picked up a brush pen. I always wanted to try a brush, but never had a reason to. And couldn't do it with ruffians, because that was far too precious. But something about a diary comic and just, the loosey-goosey nature of it made it fun again. Other great thing about journal comics is it forms great drawing habits, because you are doing it every day. And that's if you want to get to productivity, you kind of have to develop a routine of some sort. And at the end of, let's see here, where am I? At the end of the year, and along the way during that year, I found one of my favorite quotes that really kind of encapsulates who I am as a cartoonist. It's a quote by Andy Warhol. It's basically, don't think about making art, just get it done. Let everyone else decide if it's good or bad, whether they love it or hate it. While they're deciding, make more art. That quote changed my outlook and trajectory on everything. I stopped being so hard on myself. And at the end of the year, lo and behold, I had a book. And the book ended up, the diary comic's strange beast, because you can't really plan out a plot, but what you realize is there is a plot in your life that you're unaware of. And this ended up telling the story of my long distance relationship with Amy, my now wife. I was in San Diego. She lived here. And by the end of the book, during the book, I had to get over my fear of flying to actually, see her and make a relationship happen, because that's kind of important with relationships. But end of the book, spoiler alert, I moved back here. Also during this time, Derek and I were having fun, and we were writing, and we're like, you know what, we should probably do something on the website to sell comics. So we started, this is our website at the time. This is 2012, I think. I went to school again in San Diego and became a web developer, as I mentioned earlier. And we decided to offer up some free comics, because web comics were a thing. I mean, they were a thing for a long time, but I always kind of poo-pooed them because I preferred paper, still do. But we gave it a shot. We made web comics. Here's the thing about web comics. It allows you to purge your ideas. Any crazy idea you want, you throw it up there and make it happen, get it out there. That way you don't have to make this long, overproduced book. You can just make a quick one-pager. Again, same deal with journal comics. It gives you daily habits and daily goals of making a comic. It also makes you more aware of deadlines, because people are only going to go to your site if you actually post on a regular basis. And of course, the glorious thing about the internet, it offers you instant feedback. If you're not funny, the internet will tell you. If you make a typo, the internet will tell you over again. They get really angry about typos. I made a comic called Night of the Living Red Shirts, Star Trek parody with zombies. Got my highest hits as far as the website, but I didn't make the cuffs right because I was never a Trekkie. And by God, those Trekkies firebombed me for that. Great thing about webcomics, though, again, with keeping things going, at the end of the day, you can make books collecting all your webcomics because, again, you're producing material. Now, all this stuff is a long story of how I went from my slump years to my productivity beginnings. So we'll set the stage here. This is 2015, 2016. 2015, married love of my life, Amy, and 2016, we had our daughter, Isabella, who's also in the audience. So at this point, my drawing habits were awful. I had always been a night owl. Like I said, I worked third shift at Steak and Shake. So my drawing habits were, my habits were wake everyone up, get kids to school and daycare, go to work, come home, do the family thing, and get kids to bed, hang out with my wife until she was ready to go to bed. Then around 11, 12 o'clock at night, finally sit down at the drawing board and begin the process of drawing. I can tell you right out of the gate, 11, 12 o'clock at night, I was exhausted from my day, and I'd be lucky if I got a panel, let alone a line done of drawing. Something needed desperately to change. So around this time at work, I would listen to podcasts, because that's what web developers do. And my podcast routine was comic podcasts, obviously. One of the podcasts I listened to was called The Process Party. It was done by cartoonists Mike Dawson and Zach Soto, and in one of their episodes, Zach mentions that his drawing routine is that he wakes up at 5 a.m. and starts the day off drawing. And I figured, hey, that's an idea. Why don't I try that? Never been a morning person, but what the hell? We will wake up at 5 a.m. and see how it goes. Amy laughed at me, but I did it. And here's the thing about 5 a.m. House is quiet. I get an hour or two to myself with just my comics and a cup of coffee. Too tired to overthink things. And I get to start every day off as a cartoonist. Fantastic. So I'm no longer spending my day drudging through work wondering when I'm going to get to the drawing board. I've already been there. Which brings us to making time count. So here's where we get hardcore into the productivity stuff. It's important. I learned that comic making time is a must if you actually want to get stuff done. By comic making time, I mean a time that you go back to every day, continuously. That is a regiment. This hour, it doesn't have to be long, it can be an hour, 30 minutes, but that is the time where you focus solely on comics. The reason for this is it forms a habit, so your brain becomes more and more prepared to actually make comics at that time. The other thing, a lot of artists love to be down on themselves if they don't get things done. Not every day you're going to produce a page or even a panel. Some days you're going to be fried. It's the reality of life. The important thing is that you spend that time at least making a baby step forward. Now, whether that's just doing some scripting, writing a line of dialogue, or even just drawing out the panel borders so that the next day you don't have to do it. Every step forward is a step forward, and it gets you closer to the end goal of a completed work of art. Also important is not having any distractions during this time. So no phone, no television, no social media hunting, no internet, no anything. Which is very easy to do when you're at 5 a.m., but 5 a.m. isn't for everyone. Another thing, around this time, I started using different tools to keep myself, excited to draw. So I tried actual brushes, I tried nibs. You name a tool, I've probably used it at this point. I also utilize different paper sizes for different projects because an 11 by 17 piece of Bristol board is not the only way. It is actually very hard to fill, so you want to keep things. And if you can, a lot of my projects are honestly drawn in a 8.5 by 11 sketchbook. Don't be too precious. Project types, I had always, in my earlier days before Ruffians, had always had several projects going on at once. I stopped once Ruffians hit, which is part of my slump. But here's the thing about projects. There's going to be a certain point in any project's life cycle where you get tired and just don't want to do it that day. In order to keep yourself moving and the momentum going creatively, you need something else to work on. Because if you just don't do anything that day, you're going to get into a slump and not want. It's going to become that much easier the next day to not work on the project. So if you have something else to shift your attention to, preferably something that is completely separate from your main focus, you'll get something accomplished and you won't lose your creative momentum. So around this time, I also decided, you know what? Redrawing Ruffians is never going to happen, so I just finished it. I drew the remaining issues. Again, print on demand was a thing now, so I actually got color covers, and eventually it all compiled into a graphic novel. And I also got the relief of the incomplete work debt that you can get when you have a project that's lingering on forever and no end in sight. I actually finished it. And I always recommend people finish things. I also recommend that people don't start their first project with a graphic novel because that's ridiculous. But here we are. Around this time, I also found the 8-page mini comics, short stories. Fantastic way to get things done. 8 pages is perfect if you want to be productive because I usually get bored with things around page 4. And page 4, I'm halfway done, so I get the boost of finishing things. And I also discovered that if you can break things apart with 8-page minis. Plastic People was my current project. It's around 200 pages, will be collected one day in a graphic novel, but it's been produced as 8-page minis, and I never would have gotten as far had I tried to do it the Ruffians route. So page count is key. And then again, joy of completion. The more times you complete something, the more times you're going to want to come back and continue completing something. It's that creative momentum. Around this time, I also, thanks to the advice of my wife, started writing letters to people I admired and sending them comics, making friends. I started going to conventions again and made lots of friends there. And thanks to the conventions, I made friends who would eventually become the editors with me at the Columbus Scribbler. More on that in a second. Also around this time, cartoonist Noah Van Skyver used to live here, and I reached out to him, sent him some comics because I admired his work, and he invited me to a drink and draw, and because of that, we started drawing and challenging each other. And because of that, I actually met the late great Tom Spurgeon, the comics reporter, who was a big name in comics. And sheesh, so many slides. And because of that meeting, I actually got invited to a table at CXC, and lo and behold, I actually got nominated for their Emerging Cartoonist Award, which was their big deal, and I was super ecstatic about that. Which brings us to the Scribbler. These fine folks, that's Derek, again, buddy from high school, and then there's Jack Wallace and Steve Steiner, who are tabling next to me. So Scribbler beginnings, Jack came to me. We were him, Steve, and myself were buddies. We met at Space, we became friendly, started chatting, and Jack came to me in 2016 and said, "Hey man, I've got this idea, maybe we'll," thinking about a newspaper, because Steve worked for the Columbus Dispatch, the local newspaper. Maybe we'll do a newspaper, it'll be about comics, and kind of gather the community, print other people's comics. That'd be great. And this is 2016. I just had my daughter Isabella, so I was like, no, I just had a baby. That's ridiculous. You were crazy. And then a year later, I'm walking my dog with Amy, and she goes, you know what Columbus could use? A newspaper, where people come together as a community, and, you know, we can share art and write articles and stuff. I'm like, that's a brilliant idea. I know just the people to present that to. So I presented it to Jack and gave him his own idea back to him. He was game, so was Steve, and I invited Derek in to help along the journey. Goals for the paper were we mapped out our goals, which was basically to get more people in Ohio into comics. So part of that was we decided, hey, we're going to interview people, we're going to write history articles. I spent a lot of my time at the Billy Ireland because I work at OSU, so I started writing history articles. Our mission in general, free paper. We want to be able to pay the cartoonists because we all of us were cartoonists, and we know the value of seeing your work in print, but we also know the value of getting paid to see your work in print. So that was a big goal. So our time frame, we were about a year out from CXC, and we wanted to, you know, get it ready for CXC. So we premiered it at CXC in 2018, and lo and behold, huge success because, you know, it's free comics newspaper. You're just gonna say no to that. But not just that, we also got nominated for an Eisner Award. The Eisner Award is literally the Oscars of comics. I have always, the thing about the Eisners is you don't have to be a publisher to submit it, except from anybody. And I had been sending my work to the Eisners for years. And I just haphazardly sent them an issue of the Scribbler. The Eisners had a category for best comics related periodical in journalism. I figured that fit the bill. How I was very, very not professional in my sending. I didn't even send a return address. I actually learned that we were nominated from CXC when they congratulated us on Facebook because they had no way of getting in touch with us. But you know, we got the Eisner nomination. I talked to Amy, and she's like, of course you're going to Comic-Con to see if you won an Eisner. But she's like, she looked at me and she's like, but here's the thing. You know all these comic people that you're always talking about? When you go to Comic-Con, if you meet any of them, I want you to take a picture. So I did. So I got a professional pass, and I met some of my heroes, and I have great stories about all of these guys. Got Walter Simonson, I got David Lloyd, and a plethora of others. But I'm not going to share those now because I feel like we're running out of time. We've got more slides to go through. Anyway, we didn't win, but I got to meet a lot of heroes, and it was fantastic to go out to Comic-Con. And that enters us into the COVID era. Scribbler survived, which we were worried about for a little bit there because no one was going anywhere, and it's hard to distribute a newspaper if you don't have people picking it up. I started journaling again, as did most cartoonists of the era. Got another baby on the way, so that happened as well. And I started taking a long, hard look at what I wanted to do and what I wanted to get out of comics. So I started reaching out to people. This is the Rust Belt Review. It's an anthology done by Sean Knickerbocker out of Minneapolis. I reached out to him after the first issue because I loved what he was doing with it, and I was like, hey, can I make a comic? And he's like, sure. And so I started submitting to that and realized that I love short stories, and that was kind of my jam, and figured what would I do with that by myself. So that led me to creating Airbag, which is my solo anthology, and I started trying to make the comic that I always wanted to make and wanted to see on the stands. Pushed myself. Each issue is kind of self-contained collection of short stories, and all the stories kind of play off each other in very interesting ways, which leads us to the present, where we are now. right before COVID, I went to CXC before Tom Spurgeon passed. I saw him outside of one of their panels, and he asked me when I was going to do a talk, and I'm like, well, I have something to say. I don't know what I would even talk about. Well, during COVID, I actually thought about what I would actually talk about, and I started doing productivity talks. That's a picture of me at one of the first productivity talks here at Space, and then a couple years later, I actually got to present at the Billy Ireland during CXC. It was a great time. I got to share knowledge about how to be more productive in comics. And Scribblers survived, and lo and behold, we got our second Eisner nomination. Fantastic. Did the same fly by the seat of my pants to Comic-Con. This year, Kevin Eastman was getting his award for, he was getting into the Eisner Hall of Fame, and I was like, I'm gonna meet Kevin Eastman. That is my only goal. I don't care if we win, I'm gonna meet Kevin Eastman, thank him for the Ninja Turtles. Got there, stood in line, and someone was like, well, where's your pass to get Kevin Eastman to sign your stuff? Pass? Handed out passes the day before while I was on the flight over. But there's a happy ending to this. At the Eisners, thanks to my wife's great advice of getting pictures with your hero, I walked up to him after he won his award. Got to meet Kevin Eastman, got to shake his hand, thank him for the Ninja Turtles. All this led to me getting gutsy and ballsy, and guess what? I was like, you know what? I'd really love to interview Kevin Eastman. So I sent him a random email and didn't hear a word from him for 6 months until I did. And got to talk to him for 10 minutes for the Turtles' 40th anniversary. We came out with a free comic book day special on the Scribbler, which was fantastic. The 6-year-old in me was on cloud 9. Scribbler continued. Last year I did the 50 greatest comic characters of all time, and reached out to a crap ton of people, compiled a giant list through their favorite comics, and yeah. And then the summary. So here's the thing. What I've learned through 25 years of self-publishing, art is a journey. No one starts off right out of the gate, fully formed. Habits that you make in life are going to define your artistic habits. So make sure they're good ones. If you're constantly choosing television or just goofing off over drawing, you're not going to be doing a lot of drawing. Perfection is a myth. Don't get too inside yourself. Some of the best comics I've ever made were happy accidents. And just don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to reach out to people. Don't be afraid to meet your heroes. Don't be afraid, because you never know what wonderful things could happen because of it. And with that, I say thank you. And now I'm going to hand it over to all the people that can